So each year we start the fall semester with the Corbeletti charrette, which is named after one of our former department heads from 68 to 88, Raniero Corbeletti. And each year in recent history, we've invited one of our colleagues from around the world to engage us with new ideas and new ways of exploration in terms of drawing. And we host this for a week, the first week of the fall semester, and all of you, our students, engage this as fully as you possibly can while getting settled and getting into studio and all of that. It is a drawing competition. It is a hand drawing competition. The story goes that Corbeletti was such an amazing draftsman that he would come to the classroom, he would hold two chalks in his two hands, and he would start signing his name from the two ends of the blackboard, and they would meet in the middle perfectly. So he was a kind of a two-handed draftsman. So that's the reason that the competition is about drawing and concentrates on hand drawing each year. So this year we've asked Pia Simmendinger, who is a Swiss architect and artist from Zurich, to join us as the Corbeletti brief author and the juror. And so she is an architect and an artist, as I just mentioned. She holds a PhD and an undergraduate degree from the ETH in Zurich, and a graduate degree in architecture from Southern California Institute of Architecture in Los Angeles. And we are happy that she has joined us. The brief is super, super exciting. I wish I was working on the brief. It captures this moment in our lives in so many ways that is truly profound, both in terms of the mechanics of having to produce a drawing that is profound, but also very minimal in terms of what is required to do it. Yesterday, we talked about the fact that you could take a bunch of index cards and make yourself a 24 by 36 board if you don't have a 26 by 34 board. And all you need is a pencil or a paintbrush or, so in terms of instrumentation, it's minimal, but in terms of content, it's really maximal and is engaging the space that we have occupied, at least since March. I mean, I haven't moved from the seat for as long as I can remember, 12, 14 hours a day. I'm sitting right here. This is my space. Okay, I'll pass it on to Pia. I won't take too much of this time. And if you have questions, either about the competition or about the work that Pia is going to show, let's save those for the end of the presentation. You can type them in chat and I can read them and try to work on the answers. Thank you, and I'll pass it on to Pia. Thanks, Pia.
So I would like to welcome you to my lecture, Experiencing Abstract Space, the Significance of Art for the Perception of Space. The lecture is divided in three parts. I will talk about a little bit about the theory, the meaning of space for fine arts and architecture in the 20th century. I will talk a bit about the method, layering and folding, and a part will be my own work, space, scent, and texture. So what is space? The big word, space. Art and architecture have a close connection. They can influence each other. Architecture can inspire art, and art can inspire architecture. At the end of the 19th century, there was a sense of, let's say, change in architecture and art. Artists and architects were looking for new ways. They wanted to do new things, to do things in a different way. And the big topic was, how can we represent space and how do we deal with space? So I would like to show you these two photos of interior space. One is the left one is a living room in the 19th century, and the right one is the living room of the Maison Enfants by Le Corbusier in Paris, France, 1922. You see, there is a big difference. In this space, you have, everything is quite closed. You have doors, the light comes from the side, but everything is very defined. In this space, huge windows, the stairs coming up, there is a ladder opening here. It's a totally different way of the space. So why, and what happened? What was going on? So I would like to show you 3 floor plans. This is the floor plan 19th century. This is the floor plan by the house of Frank Lloyd Wright, his house. And this is a floor plan Maison Tugendhat by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. And you see there is a development. Here you have closed spaces, just doors in between, right? Everything is closed. Frank Lloyd Wright is starting opening up the spaces. Suddenly this has a connection, this has an open connection, this has an open connection. And if you look at the third one, this is a very open space, but defined by walls, a slab, columns. It's a totally different way of seeing the space. Now, to understand this development, we need to look at the development of art. So this is a painting by Pablo Picasso. He was 15 years old when he was drawing this painting, so in 1897. At this time, he also starts to begin to ask himself the question, how should a 3-dimensional form in space be shown on a 2-dimensional surface? How should the representation look like? But it was not just Picasso, who there were other artists too who were thinking about this topic, how to represent form and space on a 2-dimensional canvas. And they came up with a new spatial representation, a new spatial understanding. Cubism. That was the starting point of Cubism. Cubism is a style in art history, and it emerged from an avant-garde movement in painting that began in France, 1906. Its founders were Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque. This is a completely new way of representing space on a 2-dimensional canvas. I assume you see the new understanding of space, right? From today's perspective, Cubism represents the most revolutionary innovation in the 20th century of art. Cubism creates a new order of thought in painting. And this development influenced art and later architecture, which led then to modern architecture. So in art, there are some, after Cubism, there was, for example, suprematism. And I would like to show you this very important painting by Kazimir Malevich, The Black Square, 1915. Why is this so important? You look at it and think, yeah, nothing much that is seen there. But you have to think this is 1915. And to draw something like that is radical. And Malevich wanted that it's not longer the painting, it's the viewer that looks at the painting and starts to think and having an idea what this could be. This is a shift, a total shift, a very, very, very totally different thing. Another movement is Stijl, Dutch group of painters and architects and designers. There were like Theo van Doesburg was in it, or Piet Mondrian, later on Gerrit Rietveld, and so on. And the aim of this group was to completely turn away from the principle of traditional art and to develop a new, completely abstract formal language. And their ideas were influenced by Cubism, as I said. So you see, for example, this is called Rhythm of a Russian Dancer. Rhythm of a Russian Dancer. So a new way of showing that, the dancer, I mean. In this period, in this sequence, I also have to mention Bauhaus, 1919. This is very important for the education. The Bauhaus was founded by Walter Gropius in Weimar, Germany. It was something completely new at the time in terms of style and concept. Since the Bauhaus represented the fusion of art and craftsmanship. Today, the historic Bauhaus is the most influential educational institution in the field of architecture, art and design in the 20th century. So the Bauhaus is very important because there all these ideas of modern art and modern architecture were taught there by a lot of important artists and architects. For example, we have Paul Klee, we have Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, Josef Albers, and they all taught there, and you can see how they show space, like Klee, or how Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, like how he works with the layering here, and also Albers already working with layers at that time, but in a totally different way than the drawings you've seen end of the 19th century. So something radical changed. So quickly summarizing, we have this new understanding of space, beginning of the 20th century. We have the Cubism. We have architecture that's developing modern architecture, Le Corbusier, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, Gropius, and so on and so on. And then this, let's say, development in art and architecture was stopped by fascism in Europe. So a lot of the architects and the artists had to flee, and they immigrated to different parts of the world, the States, South America, and worked there. So after the Second World War, the development of art and architecture of the 10s and the 20s kind of continued, or there was a lot of reflection about what happened in this time. And I would like to now point out this one book, Painting Towards Architecture by Henry Russell Hitchcock, written in 1948. And why is this book so important? It is important because Hitchcock pointed out how important Cubism was for architecture. He showed in this book how this Cubism, this way of seeing the space, and how this was influenced for modern architecture. And that's why this book is so really a crucial book for the understanding of abstract space in art and architecture. So to summarize it or say the essence of what I just said was, if you look at this, before we talk about a house, right? But then now we talk about volumes. We talked about windows or doors, and now the expression is opening. We talked about room, and now it's space. And that is the big, big difference, the influence in modern architecture, modern art. And this also has had an effect in teaching. I briefly would like to mention it because I think it's quite important. You see here a drawing, basic design course of Bernard Hösli at the ETH in the 1960s. And this new way of perceiving space. There were a group of young architects. They said, okay, how do we teach this new perception of space? We need new methods. We need new exercises. And it was in Austin, Texas, at the University of Texas, that a couple of teachers came together. There was like Colin Rowe, Robert Slutsky, Bernhard Hösli, John Haydock, and others. And they developed a new method of teaching this perception of space. To teach the students spatial perception, spatial understanding, based on modern architecture, so abstract space. And later on, these teachers left Austin and they went to Cooper Union, Cornell University, Syracuse University, and the ETH in Zurich. So we have modern architecture, modern art, we have education, and of course, the art itself continued to evolve and changed and had also new ideas. And some artists are dealing intensively with abstract space and the perception of space. Art enables spatial confrontations that are not possible in architecture. The space does not have to fulfill any use. It does not have to observe any safety regulations. It does not have to function. It is a different focus, and yet art can inspire architecture incredibly strong. I would like now to show you a few examples of artists who work very spatially and doing and thinking about the space again and again. So artist I really like is Gordon Motta Clark. He worked with buildings that were supposed to be demolished, so he worked on them, and afterwards they were demolished. And he just tried to understand the space in a different way, and he cuts the whole house, just imagine. And then what kind of space do you have then in between? The light comes in, right? And it has totally different spatial understanding now of this space. Or this other one where he cut circles, huge circles, and suddenly you see totally different perspective of these different rooms, right? Suddenly you see through here and here. Fascinating, I think. And then we have, for example, Bruce Nauman, Floating Room, 1972. This wooden box hanging here, light inside, and the light comes out here. So it seems like this whole box is floating, right? No gravity anymore. So very inspiring, very inspiring. Then another artist, is Rachel Whiteread, and she works a lot with the negative space and the positive space. So the negative space of the house here becomes the positive space. And of course, Richard Serra, when he works with his huge walls of iron, here, the light coming down, just simple space, nothing else. Just when you ever have the chance to visit some of his work, please go inside and experience this intense spatial feeling that he creates. Another artist from Holland, Marianne Teuven, she also works with buildings that are going to be demolished. And then she takes out walls, and with the waste of that wall, so the ceilings, she starts to pile up new walls. Very nicely organized, very nicely organized. And create suddenly cuts and openings that were not there before. and so creates a totally new way of seeing that space of this house. Then Olafur Eliasson, this is Reimagine 2002 installation that just works with light and the protection of light onto a wall. And you see how just with this very simple method, he creates an incredible space. Here and here and here. And just a very recent work of his, Symbiotic Seeing, that was shown in Zurich this spring, shortly before everything was shut down. I had the chance to go and see it. It's a space that works with laser on top here and fog that is pushed into the room, and there are very little sounds. And the more people are inside the room, the more the ceiling changes because of the movement of the people. It's a very intense installation, very beautiful. A lot of people were fascinated by this installation, by this spatial experience. Okay, now I talked about this, said some theory about the abstract space, showed you some artists who work very spatially. And now I would like to talk about layering and folding. The method layering in art has been used since century. This is nothing new, and you can find and discover it in many different paintings and drawings. The question is, what to achieve with the method of layering? In our case, it is about the representation of abstract space. And there is an important theory book by Georgi Kepes on this subject, which talks about layering. Representation of overlapping indicates depth. It creates a sense of space. And of course, he talks much more about this layering and explaining it very carefully in his book, Language of Vision. If you are interested, I suggest to you to get this book and have a look. So now I would like to show you some examples. These examples, there are not too many examples. They show different techniques, how the artists create a perception of space with the method of layering. The first example is from the 19th century, just to show you what happened before. And this is artist Wilhelm Hammershøi, a Danish artist. And you can see, here is a room, here is a room, here is a room, here is a room. And the light comes from this side. And this is a sequence of rooms and the layers of rooms. And when I look at these beautiful drawings, I always wonder, what is behind here and what is there? And are there any people in this painting? Are they hidden somewhere? So now I show you the abstract space layering. The first artist I would like to show you is Herbert Falken. It's a German artist and also a Catholic priest. And he's an autodidact, and he got quite famous, and he also is internationally known, and he does some really beautiful work. So why is this painting so interesting? It's watercolor on cardboard, and the depth of this painting is created by many layers. So you have this layer and you have another layer and another layer, and this layer on top of each other, that starts to create this depth. It's monochromatic. In front you have very dark, and then it gets lighter and lighter and lighter to the back. And also you have to see there is a precise line guidance. There is no correction with the brush. So it just moves and creates this beautiful space. This is also Falcon. Here I would just briefly mention the light. And you see here the layering, different layers, they create depths, but the light in the center of the drawing really takes you in and makes you curious what is there. Now, another artist that it's also shown on the brief, I would like to say some words about her. It's Gecko, and it's the abbreviation of Gertrud Louise Goldschmidt. She lived from 1912 to 1994. She was born in Germany. She studied architecture, and she had to leave Germany because she was Jewish, and she left 1939 and went to Venezuela. In Venezuela, in Caracas, she worked first as an architect, and then later on in the 50s, she started to start drawing and doing sculptures. And you can really see when you look at her work there, you really see the architect in her work. She was quite successful, especially in the 70s and 60s and 70s, with her big installations and her wire netted constructions. So now I took one drawing of her, and I would like to explain a bit about the layering I'm talking about. This is watercolor drawing, so watercolor on paper. You can see only one layer of this drawing would be enough to create a spatial quality. So that's the difference between Falcon. Falcon, you need a lot of layers to create depth. In this case, it would be enough, just one. But she uses many layers, and in the superposition of many layers, she creates an intense space. This makes the drawing very complex and multi-layered. Do you see, for example, here, there's a very fine layer, and then there is a very strong layer, and the longer you look at this drawing, you see many layers on top of each other. There is a grid, right? You see this grid with the squares, and she drew it like that. It seems like it's dented and deformed this grid, this surface, in this way and in this way and in this way. And then there is also this light coming in, who's like the focus of the drawing. And this gives even more depth to the drawing. This light beam that hits the structure and is also kind of twisted. And then you have the colors. Color here, it's almost like a yellowish, orange, reddish, also almost to go to purple. And when you look, it's important to look carefully at this drawing, how many layers she put on top of each other. So the important thing here is she can absolutely not do that in one time. You really have to work on this drawing many times. And if you have ever worked with watercolor, you know how difficult this is to get this quality of density of color. It's absolutely beautiful piece. Simply wonderful. Another work is by Anne Emery, a French artist. born 1958. She lives in Paris. She studied there. She works a lot with colors. This one is not so colorful, but normally she works much more with color. Here, the layering is actually, you have two layers. You have the front layer, you have this layer in the back, and these two layers are just connected by this simple opening, or this hole, let's say. I think this is quite interesting. The front is beautifully drawn by this lines, the texture of these lines. You have shadows here, you have the light. And then you have this hole also. Here you have a dark line that indicates shadow. You have a light line that indicates the light. And suddenly this hole becomes a certain thickness, a materiality, and the wall becomes a materiality. And then when you look inside, you have like a floor, a wall, and then there is again light here, there is shadow here, shadow here. And I'm like, oh, I would like to step there and look inside what actually is happening back there. And it's so simple and so strong, this drawing, just with these two layers and connected with this one hole. Then totally different way of layering and creating space. This is artist Shariana Shabatzi. She is born in Tehran and she immigrated to Germany. She's born 1974 and today she lives in Zurich. Actually, she's educated as a photographer, but she also paints. And when you look at, she works a lot with colors. And here, the interesting thing is how these surfaces come together. And then you have in these areas, this overlay and how carefully she works with the overlaying of the colors and how these then start to create different spatial perception. Suddenly this could be a corner, but then how does it work with this, these surfaces? Or here you had also a corner and then this could be a wall and so on. So you can start looking at it and see many different things. This other quite strong painting of hers and is, you have this side that's light and you have this side which is kind of dark. You're wondering, is this going up and this lays over it? But then when you look carefully, you see this is like not possible. Spatially, this is not possible. This line cannot go here, this not. The more you get into it, you see a lot of space, but then you realize it cannot work. It's somehow confusing. So for me, it's a very interesting and a strong piece of art. So I have shown you now 4 different ways of how you can do layering. 4 different artists, I'm not counting Homosoi, and to show you how this could be done. So the next now is the folding. Some words now for the folding. Folding is an additional special layer that is introduced because of current COVID-19 situation. That is how it is. But what I would like to say is, in crisis, we are challenged. Situations arise in which we need new solutions. These are opportunities that stimulate our creativity and create something new. So this new layer of folding, I see it exactly like that. So folding can create space. Folding the paper, there are countless ways to do this. You can fold a pattern. You can fold, you can follow strict rules, or you can fold freely. But it is important to recognize the potential of the folding. folding forward, like here, folding forward, and then fold again, fold here again, fold backwards, and fold to fold. The folding has something also very haptic. You have to take the paper in your hand and start playing with it and folding and see what's doing. And it demands spatial thinking. In my opinion, it's a great exercise because you really have to think back and forward in all different sides, on all different sides. So this work is by Thomas and René Rabitius, two younger German artists, live in Berlin and studied in Hamburg. And when you look at this piece of paper, this is one piece of paper. There are no cuts. This is just folds, everywhere folds. Amazing, isn't it? Just folds. And this is, as you can see, there is no rigid pattern. And you also can see that these folds create this shadow, and then it also creates depth. So suddenly the paper has a certain thickness. It has a new materiality. So it's like from a 2D plane, it gets a three-dimensional touch. Then on this artist who works with folding, Vanessa Henn, also German, young artist. She works, some of her work is with graphite on paper. This is graphite on paper and folding. So there is an irregular pattern laid on top of each other, especially in the corners. You can see it here. She also works with light and shadow. More shadow areas. And then you have the folds, right, where she emphasizes certain patterns and then unfold it again. So in this case, you really have the paper, the graphite, and the folding, and it really becomes one piece. The same here. Same here. Another example is Emil Cimotti. Also an artist who in his, he died last year, and in his later work, he did a lot of the so-called paper reliefs, where he's actually a sculptor, but then when he got older, he worked a lot with paper, and the paper started to fold it and work on it and color on it, and then it has some connection to the sculpture, so that the paper becomes a three-dimensional feeling. So you can see here the folding combined with the color to one piece. So these were some thoughts and informations and about abstract space and about layering and about folding. And now the second part of my lecture will be about my own work. So this is about space, scent, and texture. So how do I look at things? This is the front of my website. I work very analog. The process is for me very important. I love to examine the material very carefully. I work on a piece many days. Touch it, feel it, turn it, twist it, touch it again. And over time, my work evolves, and I look at it, I see things, I develop, I go back and forth. And of course, sometimes I do a lot of things, but it's not what I want. And then suddenly there is what I want. So it's a process. And it's that also what I talk about your drawing. It should be a process, and it should I hope it should be a lot of fun for you to do it. So enjoy it, really. It can be wonderful. So to understand my work, or to maybe give you some idea where I come from or what interests me, I would like to show you some artists who inspire me. For me, in my work, the five senses are very inspiring to me. So the touch, the vision, the hearing, the smell, just inspire me very much. And so if we talk about sight, there is, for example, Walter de Maria lightning field. I've visited this installation a couple of years ago. Beautiful, beautiful piece of art. When you get there at noon, this is this big field of steel posts. When you get there by noon, you hardly see them. But then when the sun goes down, suddenly this whole field of posts in the landscape appear. Beautiful work. Or James Turrell. James Turrell with his, how he creates these spaces, and you go inside and then you have to wait, and suddenly you start seeing these squares. He's a master in playing with light. Also this, right? And this becomes this abstract space, very tender, very beautifully done. And this is just a series of how I look at things, photos I did. How do I see things? What do I see, and how do I perceive them? Also this one, this was from last year in Denmark. The same view over several days, always the same view, how the weather changed. Then we have smell, Wolfgang Leib. If you ever have the chance to see some of his work, it's very intense when you be in a space like that, and it smells very strong of beeswax. Or another, Ernesto Neto, works a lot with different spices like pepper, like ginger, or cloves hanging. And when you enter that space, you're filled with these smells. Touch, there is an installation by Guido Mareles, where you walk on this powder. It's you have to take off your shoes and then you walk on the powder. And it's a whole long way how to get to the final space. This powder on your feet and the smell of this powder is very inspiring. And another piece is another important artist for me is Günter Oecker. He has this nail work, nail paintings, nail installations, and we also would like to touch it, how he does here. So these are the artists that inspire me and are important for me and my work. So now I show you some of my own pieces. First, about space. So I work a lot with plaster and wax. They are not natural materials. I like that they are hard and soft. And there is this being imprecise and very precise. It's like sharp-edged and not so sharp. And the colors are natural colors. I like to the wax is dyed with plants. So to get this type of color, you see a little bit here the plants and how this color is made is by these different plants like pepper, like lavender, like thyme or rosemary or roses. And when you get to my studio, it always smells quite nicely. These are some other three-dimensional objects, always combined with plaster and the wax. And these are the same model from different sides. I like to turn them, that they have different sides, to touch them, this hard plaster and the very soft wax, and create these faces. And yeah, the wax, the plaster. And here I show you some, this is a one step, first one, and it evolves, it develops. So this will be this when wax is added. See these spaces. This is the final object. Another one, what I like to do is to create very narrow spaces, different types of spatial situations. Here you see two of the plants. This again, this color is created by dyeing the wax with the plants. It's another object I did. I like to do this very intense, create these very intense spaces. This is one of the latest pieces I did. Again, it's the same model from different sides. Same model, just depending when you turn and look at the model. So when I work on it, I always turn it, look at it from different sides, moving, touching, cleaning. Yeah, it's a long process until one of these pieces is done. So another a topic I like to deal with is scent. These are boxes that inside there is a smell created by how I poured these pieces. This is again with wax and plaster, but it works a lot with different smelling materials. So they smell quite a long time. The problem with the smell is it's like with a perfume. At one point, it's gone. So this is still something I'm working on and trying to find solutions how I can capture the smell for a longer time. This also has a lot to do with smell, and it has a lot to do with layering. So it's the same piece. Here's the wax quite hot and fluid, and then it gets harder and harder. And you can see this piece has many layers of wax. And in the end, that's the final product. This is also an installation with smells, wax, and plants. This is lavender, this is thyme. And the color of the wax comes from the plant. And then I put light in the frame. And then the final work I like to show you is about texture. This is a drawing that has many layers with its paper, Japanese paper and gouache done. Also this one, this has two sides, actually you could turn it, but I prefer this side because here you see how it shines through and it gets also this layering and this subtle, fine depth to it. Then I did, a couple of years ago, I worked a lot with paper and wax. So this is paper and this is just wax and creating these different layers of wax, all about layering and wax and paper. Here you see too. Then another work I did also a couple of years ago. I like to take things apart and reassemble it in a new way, to look at them in a new way and discover new things. So I have this plant, right? You see the plant here. And then I really carefully look at this. What does this plant do for me? And I reassemble it in a new way. Takes some time. It's like meditation. So you have this plant and then reassemble it in a new way. This is another wax piece, a wax work with a lot of layering, same work, layers over layers over layers. And that is the final piece. Here, I just show when I do my objects or when I do a relief with plaster. I do this with cardboard, as you can see, and then it takes quite a time to clean it up afterwards. But this is actually, again, it's like meditation, and by touching these pieces over and over again, I really get a strong connection and feeling for my pieces. That is very important for me to develop my work, my piece of art. Would not function without this. This again, this is also an older piece. This is a recent piece where again you have a lot of, you have the layer of the plaster and the layer of the wax on this level, and then over here, and then there is also a cut behind in the plants. So this is some of my work I've showed you, and I hope you got some inspiration and see what you do. I'd like to thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you, Pia, for this wonderful talk. Again, we are missing the loud applause of 200 people. So I will open up chat here. Thank you. New ways to think about drawing. Very good. So if you have questions for Pia, either in relationship to the competition brief or about her work, please feel free to put them in chat and I will read them out loud and Pia can respond to them. I have to just, in the meanwhile, while we're waiting for people to put in the chat, this work with plants and wax is so novel, and also at the same time it has such a long, it feels like it has a huge history. It feels like we've always been doing this, but I can't think of anybody who has actually done this like the way that you're doing it. So it's really fabulous, and it brings to light stuff that we all probably have in our yards and around us, but really don't look at them. And I think what you're doing is really bringing it to light in a way that we can all see it and pay attention to it.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Kirat is asking, are there any materials you have not explored and would like to?
No, not right now. Not right now. I tested, for example, concrete, but I'm not so happy with concrete. It's too poisonous for me. It's too difficult to work with it. Maybe later I will do that again. And actually also because of COVID-19, I have idea of a big installation, and I will work with fabric. I will build some huge fabric volumes, and I can exhibit them in September. So this is something totally new for me, and we see with how this will go. But again, it's COVID is not only negative. For me, it has a lot of positive things too, because I'm doing things I've not done before. So this is good. This is good. So I'm on it. So no, actually, no. If I have something in mind to do, I just start doing it. Think, okay, this material, and then I do things. So yeah.
There was a question in Q&A, which I think was just removed or answered. I don't know. So the question was, I think I can also answer this, or you can. It's about folding, and whether when you fold the drawing, if the folded size can be smaller than 24 by 36. And what I was going to say is that there are two foldings in this project. One is folding as a process for work, which you can keep folding and unfolding the same drawing as a way of working. And the drawing remains at 24 by 36, and you can fold and unfold. And then there's the folding that is, I would say, mechanical at one level, but also can and should be an inherent part of the production of the drawing, which allows you to fold the drawing to fit in a 9 by 12 envelope. So in my view, there are at least two ways of thinking about folding, and hopefully the two ways overlap one another and become the same. But you can potentially think in two different ways. Yeah, I don't know if you might want to add something to that.
Oh, I think.
No, good. Okay, so one here I'll read to you. Thank you for your talk and sharing your inspiring work. You keep the molds from your cast pieces. Do you document the process of making your pieces? Do you see the support structure that you use to create the artwork as a part of them or not?
Yes, on my Instagram account, you would see some of the molds I did, because they look somehow like a piece of art itself, but they're made out of cardboard. So I work a lot with the things I just find. So I never throw away big cardboard boxes, because I always use them for my cast. So you see the cardboard, when I put the plaster in it, afterwards it's destroyed. So I have to throw it away. But I also, you're right, I document it all the time. I take a picture of the cast, and then I take a picture when uncasting it. But yes, the cast is destroyed after. It cannot keep it.
Another question that's here. Can you speak about the scale of your work? In some pieces, this was clear from the context of the images. Other works, for example, the series of texture drawings from deconstructed plants, it's less clear. It's about the size and scale of the work.
The size is, all my work is not huge. It's about this size, small. So the drawings can be A1, A0. That was, is this in inches? I don't know. I forgot. But the models, the objects are not so big. I started lately to get bigger, and then they have a different look. They are much more bulky or much more strong. So it's a bit different than my other work. That is something I would like to do at one point, to get to do a real big object. So yeah, maybe next year.
Another question that's just posted: how long typically does it take for the wax with the plants to dry or harden? And how does that intermediate waiting time affect your process?
Good question. It always depends how big the piece of wax is, because I melt the wax and, okay, one more thing. First, I do the plaster. I always do first the plaster mold and do my plaster object. This needs to dry. This takes at least a day, that it really is hard and nice. And then I have to build another mold to that piece. And this mold has to be really tightly sealed, because the melted wax is like water. And this is the tricky part. And then if I pour in the wax, if it's a big piece, it takes quite a long time. So I pour it in, and then I have to wait a couple of hours. The best thing is to do it one day and then continue the next day. So concerning the process, see how I work, I do many things at the same time. So I never have, let's say, time that I don't know what to do. So I pour the wax, and then I start drawing on one hand. I have like two, 3 tables in my atelier, in my studio. And there is always something going on. I go from one table to the other table, and this table, and then I start doing this. And so it's a process on different levels. So it can happen that one piece, 2 pieces happen at the same time. And that's very inspiring for me. And I love it. And I could spend hours here. But sometimes I have to do other things too.
Thank you. I do not see any new questions on either the chat or the Q&A. And oh, there's one new one in the Q&A. Let's see what it says. How many hours a week do you get to spend on your work?
Right now, I have a lot of time, which is perfect. 5 days, 5 or 6 days a week. This is concern. With my husband, we shifted, so he's more at home and I'm more in my studio. Like last year, he was always working a lot, and now I'm working a lot. So we shifted, and I enjoy it very much. He's right now houseman right now.
Super. Thank you so much, Pia, both for this really inspiring brief and also your time today with the lecture and sharing your beautiful work with us. Another kind of a side piece that I find amazing about your work in relationship to what we're doing with Corbaletti is how resourceful you are with the work, and the materials that you're using are things that we all either have or can easily gain access to literally in our homes or apartments or wherever. There's not access needed to difficult to find or difficult to source materials. That adds a layer to the work that you've asked the students to do.
Yep, exactly.
Thank you so much.